Between 1979 and 1983, deputies from the Scott County Sheriff's Office responded to at least 8 disturbance calls at a weathered residence off County Road 342, 5 miles southeast of Morley, Missouri. The home belonged to Harold Dean Jennings, DOB December 9, 1949, a diesel mechanic, and his wife Eleanor Grace Jennings, DOB March 27, 1954, a former church secretary turned homemaker. Each call ended the same way, Harold answering the door with the odor of alcohol on his breath, Eleanor glimpsed behind him, pale, silent, and bruised. According to incident reports and hospital logs, Eleanor presented at Southeast Missouri Hospital on 3 occasions in an 18-month span. June 1982, fractured ulna. December 1982, broken nasal bone and severe periorbital swelling. July 1983, 3 cracked ribs and deep bruising across the lower back. In each case, Harold told medical staff the same story: his wife was unstable, liked to drink, and didn't watch where she was going. He claimed she'd fallen downstairs, slipped in the shower, or once, walked into the porch door in the dark. Hospital notes from a nurse practitioner on July 18, 1983, documented Eleanor whispering that Harold did it, but when asked to repeat the statement aloud, she demurred. A mandated follow-up welfare check yielded no cooperation. She would later tell her sister Lydia, "If I talk, he'll bury me before the cops get here. And the kids too." By 1983, Eleanor had become nearly invisible outside her property. Neighbors said the curtains stayed drawn, the yard overgrown, and the mailbox rarely emptied. Lydia Cottrell, who lived 2 counties east, later testified that her last conversation with Eleanor took place on September 27. Eleanor had said only one thing before hanging up. "I have a plan. If I don't call you by Halloween, you'll know why." She never called. Unbeknownst to Harold, Eleanor had contacted a domestic violence shelter in Cape Girardeau and arranged for intake. She had stashed a packed suitcase under the bed, collected her children's birth certificates, and gathered $43 in cash in a coffee can beneath the sink. She believed Harold would be gone through the weekend on a scheduled long-haul delivery run to Paducah, Kentucky. But on Friday, October 21, he came back a day early, drunk, agitated, and in the middle of a storm that would leave the back roads soaked and impassable. By morning, Eleanor was gone. At 6:42 hours on Saturday, October 22, 1983, a neighbor, Mrs. Ruth Ann McKinley, age 61, contacted the Scott County Sheriff's Office. She reported hearing loud shouting and something breaking at the Jennings residence the night before around 2300 hours. According to her statement, the yelling lasted approximately 10 minutes, followed by silence and what she described as a single, heavy thud, like furniture tipping or something big hitting the floor. Due to frequent prior disturbances, Mrs. McKinley did not intervene but grew concerned when she noticed Harold Jennings' pickup truck parked askew on the lawn at dawn, engine cold, and no signs of activity from inside the house. Deputy Michael Easley was dispatched at 7:18 hours. Upon arrival, he noted the truck was unlocked with the keys still in the ignition. Mud tracked across the cab floor matched fresh boot prints leading around the rear of the house and into the backyard. Easley knocked twice on the front door, receiving no answer. When he proceeded to the back entrance, he found the rear storm door latched but unsecured. Easley described the interior of the home as cluttered and dark, heavy with the smell of stale beer and bleach. He identified signs of a recent struggle: an overturned coffee table in the living room, a broken picture frame on the floor, and red stains, later confirmed as blood, smeared along the hallway baseboards. A torn floral print robe lay in the bathroom doorway, and the master bedroom showed disrupted bedding, a cracked headboard, and a broken lamp on the floor. At 7:41 hours, Easley located Harold Jennings in the backyard. The subject was kneeling near the northeast edge of the property, beside a half-excavated hole approximately 4 feet long by 2 feet wide. He appeared intoxicated, wearing soiled jeans and a sleeveless undershirt. A shovel and stained bedsheet were lying beside the pit. Jennings claimed he was just trying to bury a dead dog. When asked to produce the dog, Jennings was unable to provide a consistent explanation. Easily, noting the sheet was large enough to wrap a body and spotted with what appeared to be human hair, requested backup and detained Jennings at 7:52 hours. A subsequent search of the excavation site, conducted by deputies Terry Langford and Rebecca Nolan, confirmed the presence of human remains. The victim, later positively identified as Eleanor Grace Jennings, was partially wrapped in the stained bedsheet. She displayed extensive facial trauma, a fractured jaw, and visible ligature marks around the neck and wrists. Fingernails on both hands were broken, and dried blood was present beneath the right index nail. Preliminary crime scene photographs documented drag marks through the dewy grass from the rear porch to the burial site, as well as partial shoe impressions consistent with Harold Jennings' size 11 work boots. The children, Robert and Anna, were not present at the scene. A neighbor later confirmed that Eleanor had sent them to stay overnight with a cousin in Sykeston the previous afternoon, a move interpreted by authorities as a protective action, suggesting Eleanor may have anticipated a final confrontation. Jennings was taken into custody and booked into the Scott County Detention Center at 9:24 hours. He declined to answer questions and requested legal counsel. Initial charge, second-degree murder, pending autopsy and forensic examination. Following his detainment on October 22, 1983, Harold Dean Jennings was held under observation at the Scott County Detention Center in Benton, Missouri. Booking logs recorded a blood alcohol level of 0.19% at the time of intake. During the first 18 hours in custody, Jennings remained largely unresponsive to inquiries, requesting food, cigarettes, and a telephone call to his brother but offering no voluntary statement regarding the events of the previous night. At 4:10 hours on October 23, following medical clearance and sobering, Jennings requested to speak with a deputy. Detective Sergeant Elmer Tate conducted the recorded interview, lasting 87 minutes. Jennings waived his right to legal counsel on record, stating he wanted to explain what happened. What followed was a fragmented, contradictory statement, part confession, part deflection. Jennings claimed Eleanor had attacked him during an argument over money. He alleged she'd thrown a glass ashtray at his head, called him a failure, and threatened to leave with the children. She said she had someone else lined up, Jennings told Sergeant Tate. Said I'd be alone and nobody would care. When pressed on what happened next, Jennings admitted to striking Eleanor once, to quiet her down, stating she fell and didn't get back up. This version conflicted with physical evidence. The autopsy, conducted that morning by Dr. Judith Kroll at Southeast Missouri Hospital, determined cause of death as manual strangulation with associated blunt force trauma to the face and skull. Eleanor sustained a fractured zygomatic arch, displaced mandible, and petechial hemorrhaging in both eyes. Additionally, patterned abrasions on her wrists and ankles were consistent with restraint by an extension cord later recovered from the Jennings residence. When confronted with these findings, Jennings amended his statement, asserting Eleanor had been hysterical, and that he had only tied her wrists to stop her from hurting herself. He denied intending to kill her. I was drunk. I don't remember everything. Maybe I grabbed her too hard, he said. I didn't mean for it to happen. It got out of hand. Throughout the interview, Jennings attempted to portray himself as the victim of provocation and mental stress. He insisted Eleanor had driven him crazy, with nagging, and denied ever hitting her previously, a claim easily refuted by hospital records and past incident reports. When Sergeant Tate referenced the suitcase found under the bed and Eleanor's shelter plans, Jennings grew agitated and terminated the interview, demanding a lawyer. The next morning, October 24, 1983, Jennings' court-appointed defense attorney, Martin Scholes, filed a motion to suppress the confession, citing Jennings' intoxicated state during the initial waiver of counsel. While the motion was eventually denied, the defense shifted its strategy toward undermining the prosecution's portrayal of intent, suggesting the killing occurred in the heat of the moment, rather than as part of a premeditated act. Meanwhile, investigators from the Missouri State Highway Patrol's Crime Scene Division continued processing physical evidence from the Jennings property. Blood traces were found in multiple rooms of the house, including the bedroom closet, where Eleanor's suitcase had been concealed. Swabs from under her fingernails yielded epithelial tissue consistent with defensive scratching, material later confirmed as Harold Jennings via serological analysis. Eleanor's funeral was held on October 27, attended by over 60 individuals. Her children remained in protective custody with her sister, Lydia Cottrell, pending custody proceedings. The state of Missouri moved forward with upgrading the charge to first-degree murder based on the evidence of restraint, motive, and concealment attempt. After Eleanor Jennings' body was recovered, investigators reconstructed Harold Jennings' actions between the time of her death and the arrival of law enforcement. Analysis of the crime scene, weather reports, and soil conditions indicated that Jennings had begun attempting to dig a burial pit sometime after midnight on October 22. Rainfall earlier in the week had softened the ground considerably, complicating his efforts. Authorities recovered a stained claw hammer near the back porch and a pair of soaked leather gloves discarded in a trash bin behind the shed. The hammer bore traces of both blood and hair matching the victims. Jennings had told detectives he thought about calling for help but instead decided to fix the problem. His choice of words, noted verbatim in the arrest affidavit, would later become a centerpiece of the prosecution's argument for premeditation. In the kitchen, investigators found a bleach bottle with the cap off, a damp mop, and water pooled near the baseboards. Blood traces were still detectable on the hallway floor and beneath the refrigerator, suggesting a rushed, incomplete cleaning attempt. Forensic luminol revealed drag patterns indicating the body had been moved from the bedroom to the back door before being wrapped in a bedsheet. Witness interviews established that Jennings had remained at the property throughout the night. No outgoing phone calls were made, and the truck engine showed no evidence of recent operation. A neighbor reported seeing a dim light on in the backyard around 3 a.m. but did not approach. In interviews following the arrest, Jennings claimed he was panicked and wasn't thinking straight. He said he intended to bury Eleanor so the kids wouldn't have to see her. Yet the concealment measures, burial, chemical cleanup, and disposal of the hammer, suggested a calculated effort to obscure evidence, not a disoriented or grief-driven act. Further scrutiny came from the discovery of a second set of footprints, barefoot, smaller in size, in the mud near the shallow grave. Investigators determined they belonged to Eleanor. Impression depth and directionality suggested she had fled the house at some point and had been caught and returned by force. Combined with the presence of restraints, these findings indicated a prolonged altercation rather than an impulsive blow. The prosecution now had a sequence: intent, pursuit, restraint, murder, concealment. Jennings' claims of accident no longer matched the facts. The State of Missouri v. Harold Dean Jennings opened on February 13, 1984, in the 33rd Judicial Circuit Court, Scott County. Presiding Judge Marvin H. Belton ruled the case would proceed on a charge of first-degree murder, with special consideration for premeditation and attempted concealment. A plea agreement was offered in January, second-degree murder with a 25-year sentence, but Jennings rejected the deal on counsel's advice, maintaining that the death of Eleanor Jennings was unintentional. Prosecutor Karen Doss opened with a clear narrative, a pattern of domestic violence, a documented history of threats, and deliberate post-mortem concealment. This was not a loss of control, Doss told the jury. This was a man who came home early, found his wife preparing to escape, and made sure she never would. The prosecution's case leaned heavily on forensic evidence. Dr. Judith Kroll, the medical examiner, testified that Eleanor sustained multiple injuries inconsistent with a single fall or accidental impact. Her jaw was shattered, her wrists were bruised in a manner consistent with cord restraint, and the ligature marks around her throat were deep, symmetrical, and forceful, Dr. Kroll stated. Death was not instantaneous. It took time. Crime scene photographs were introduced: the shallow grave, the blood-streaked hallway, the sheet-wrapped body. Luminol patterns highlighted the body's movement through the house. These visual records were accompanied by testimony from Deputy Michael Easley and Detective Sergeant Elmer Tate, who both emphasized the deliberate nature of Jennings' cleanup efforts and his inconsistent account of events. Central to the prosecution's timeline was the packed suitcase found under the bed and Eleanor's documented contact with a domestic violence shelter. A representative from the Cape Girardeau Women's Refuge testified under subpoena that Eleanor had scheduled intake for the afternoon of October 22, the very day her body was found. The defense, led by Martin Scholes, attempted to introduce doubt regarding Jennings' mental state. Scholes called a clinical psychologist, Dr. Alan Greaves, who stated Jennings exhibited signs of intermittent explosive disorder and alcohol-induced amnesia. In highly intoxicated states, Greaves testified, he may have lacked full awareness of his actions or their consequences. However, under cross-examination, Dr. Greaves admitted that Jennings had no prior clinical diagnosis and had refused psychological evaluation for most of his adult life. Jennings did not testify. His recorded statement from October 23, admitted into evidence after judicial review, served as his only account. Prosecutor Doss replayed excerpts during closing arguments, including the phrase, "I was fixing the problem." The jury, composed of 7 women and 5 men, deliberated for 11 hours over 2 days. On February 23, 1984, they returned with a unanimous verdict, guilty of murder in the first degree. At sentencing on March 1, Jennings was given life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Judge Belton, in his remarks, noted the sustained, predatory nature of the offense and stated, the court finds no mitigating circumstance sufficient to warrant leniency. Robert and Anna Jennings were awarded permanent custody to their maternal aunt, Lydia Cottrell. Both children received state-funded trauma counseling through the Division of Family Services. Jennings was transferred to the Missouri State Penitentiary in Jefferson City on March 5. Following his conviction and transfer to Missouri State Penitentiary, Harold Jennings remained largely uncooperative with prison psychologists and refused to participate in rehabilitation programs. Records from the Department of Corrections indicated that Jennings declined all visitation rights, including from his own siblings. Multiple requests for interviews by media and advocacy groups were either ignored or rejected. Institutional behavior logs described Jennings as quiet, non-disruptive, but chronically unremorseful. During a 1986 psychological review, he was quoted as saying, "I lost everything because one person decided I wasn't worth staying for." Evaluators marked him as emotionally evasive, incapable of accepting responsibility, and high risk for emotional regression under pressure. Meanwhile, the Jennings case spurred changes in how local law enforcement handled domestic abuse reports. In April 1984, the Scott County Sheriff's Office implemented new protocols mandating secondary officer interviews with victims in any case of suspected spousal assault, even when the victim declined to press charges. These changes were quietly instituted but were directly attributed to failures in the Jennings investigation, per an internal memo. Eleanor's story drew regional attention after a 1984 article in the Southeast Missouri entitled, "Buried at Home, the Signs No One Stopped." The piece led to increased funding for the Cape Girardeau Women's Refuge and prompted the formation of a victim support task force in the 33rd Judicial Circuit. By 1985, the Missouri Department of Social Services had launched a pilot initiative to coordinate shelter resources with hospital intake staff, allowing anonymous documentation of abuse even when victims refused to file official complaints. Her children, Robert and Anna, were placed under the guardianship of Eleanor's sister, Lydia Cottrell. Court records and later interviews indicated both children received therapy into adolescence. Robert enlisted in the U.S. Navy in 1994. Anna, after a period of homeschooling, completed a nursing degree in 2001. Neither sibling has spoken publicly about the case, though court records show they legally changed their last names in 1996. No appeals were filed by Harold Jennings. He died in custody on June 11, 1992, of cardiac arrest at the age of 42. His body was unclaimed and interred in the prison cemetery under a numbered marker. The case file was formally closed by the Scott County Sheriff's Office on September 30, 1992. In the years following the conviction and death of Harold Jennings, the Jennings case was cited in legal education materials and training sessions for rural law enforcement in Missouri and neighboring states. The case became a reference point for systemic failures in identifying patterns of escalating domestic abuse, particularly in isolated communities with limited oversight and support infrastructure. By 1995, the Missouri Coalition Against Domestic and Sexual Violence had incorporated Eleanor Jennings' story into its training curriculum for healthcare professionals and shelter coordinators. Her case was used to illustrate the importance of nonverbal reporting patterns, subtle indicators of coercion, and the role of medical professionals in documenting abuse with or without the victim's verbal consent. In 2003, Eleanor's daughter, Anna, by then a registered nurse, quietly attended a panel hosted by the Southeast Missouri Hospital Association on improving trauma response for domestic violence victims. Though she did not speak publicly, a representative later confirmed her attendance, noting her presence as a quiet full-circle moment. She had not returned to the Jennings home since 1983. The residence at County Road 342 remained unoccupied for over a decade following the murder. Property tax delinquencies and structural decay led to its demolition in 1997. The land was resold to a private farming cooperative and cleared for crop rotation. No marker remains. In the 2000s, Missouri's Department of Corrections transitioned its policies around incarcerated individuals with histories of domestic homicide. Risk assessments were updated to incorporate known behavioral red flags like prolonged control, isolation of victims, and threats to children, all patterns present in the Jennings case. A posthumous review of Scott County case logs in 2010 showed a 37% increase in mandatory referrals to social services for domestic disturbance calls after 1984. While the Jennings case was not the only contributor to these changes, internal documentation from the Sheriff's Department acknowledged it as the catalyst that exposed unacceptable gaps. Eleanor Grace Jennings was buried in the Cottrell family plot outside Chaffee, Missouri. Her grave marker reads only Eleanor Grace. 1954 to 1983. Mother. Daughter. Silenced, then heard. Her story endures in policy, in training rooms, and in the lives of two children who survived her silence, and its end.